Most people think of superpowers as something external, something you're born with, or bitten by, or chosen for. Flight, strength, invisibility, the ability to bend the world without being touched by it. And meanwhile, humanity keeps overlooking the one power that's been quietly shaping everything all along: the ability to change form. Not physically, but internally. Because what if the real superpower was never about changing the world? What if it was about changing the form you show up as inside it? Think about it. You don't speak the same way in every room. You don't carry yourself the same way under pressure as you would in peace. Your posture changes. Your breathing changes. Your chemistry changes. You become someone else without even realizing it. That's shape-shifting. Not the kind you see in myths, but the kind you live every single day. You've done it in survival. You've done it in leadership. You've done it in love. And you've done it in loss. The problem isn't that humans can't shapeshift. It's that we've been doing it unconsciously, reactively, habitually, based on fear, conditioning, or expectation. And when a power operates without awareness, it doesn't feel like power. It feels like life is happening to you. But there was a time, long before modern language stripped this idea down, when transformation wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Ancient cultures didn't talk about shapeshifting as fantasy. They talked about it as mastery. The ability to regulate your inner state so precisely that your presence alone changed outcomes. Not by force, not by control, but by frequency. And that's what this episode is about. Not mythology, not escapism, and not pretending you're something you're not. This is about recovering an ability humans once used on purpose. The ability to consciously shift who you are being, emotionally, mentally, energetically, until life itself rearranges to meet your new form. Because before we forgot how powerful we were, we used to change on purpose. And that's where we begin. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the show. In this part 1, we're going to be talking about the forgotten superpower. Humanity has always been fascinated by transformation. We tell stories about people who could become wolves under the sun, gods who shifted forms to walk among humans, heroes who unlocked hidden abilities when the moment demanded it. And we watch those stories thinking, if only I had something like that. Meanwhile, the real superpower has been operating quietly inside us the entire time. Because if you look closely, humans change form constantly. The exhausted parent who finds strength they didn't know they had when their child is in danger. The quiet person who suddenly becomes unrecognizable when they step into leadership. The person who survives trauma by becoming harder, sharper, more alert. And later, softens again when safety returns. That's not coincidence. That's transformation. We call it resilience, we call it coping, we call it growth. But stripped down to its essence, it's something simpler and far more powerful. It's shape-shifting. Not of the body, but of being. You don't need fangs or fur to change form. You change when your nervous system recalibrates, when your posture shifts, when your breath deepens, and when your perception sharpens or narrows to survive. Every version of you that's ever emerged under pressure wasn't random. It was adaptive intelligence. And here's the part most people miss. You didn't lose those forms when the moment passed. They're still in you. They're stored in memory. They're stored in chemistry. And they're stored in awareness. The only difference is whether they emerge by accident or by choice. Most of us are waiting for a lightning strike, a breakthrough moment, a permission slip, or a dramatic awakening, not realizing the storm has been inside us the whole time. Every time you outgrew a version of yourself, you shapeshifted. Every time life demanded more and you became more, you shapeshifted. Every time you refused to stay small in a moment that mattered, you shapeshifted. But because it didn't look mystical, because it didn't come with special effects, we dismissed it. We've been misdefining power. True power isn't dominance. It isn't force. It isn't control over others. True power is transformation on command. And right now, most people don't realize they've been holding that ability unconsciously their entire lives, which is why the next steps matter. Because once you realize you've already been shapeshifting, the question becomes, what happens when you learn to do it on purpose? Because some of the content can be maybe a little complex still, as I describe it and break it down, what I'm going to do from time to time is provide a mini recap. So that's what I'm going to do now for part 1. We've been chasing imagined superpowers while ignoring the one built into our design. Shapeshifting isn't something you need to learn. It's something you need to remember. And until now, most of us have been doing it unconsciously. All right, let's talk about part 2, the science of form and frequency. By now, something should be clicking. Because once you stop treating shapeshifting like fantasy, you start noticing how often your body responds before your thoughts catch up. That's not imagination. It's biology. Your brain is not fixed. Your nervous system is not static. And your chemistry is not locked into one setting. It's adaptive by design. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated thought, emotion, and behavior. In simple terms, what you practice internally, your brain reinforces structurally. Every time you think differently, your neurons fire differently. Every time you act differently, new pathways strengthen. Every time you regulate instead of react, your nervous system learns a new baseline. That's not metaphor. That's form changing at the neurological level. And it doesn't stop there. Your body follows your signal. When you shift from fear to focus, cortisol drops. When you move from chaos to clarity, your breath slows. When you choose presence over panic, your heart rate adjusts. Your chemistry responds to consciousness, which means every time you elevate intention, you are literally morphing, biochemically, neurologically, energetically. Quick side note, cortisol is a vital steroid hormone from your adrenal glands that manages stress, metabolism, blood sugar, and inflammation, often called the stress hormone. I got that from the interwebs. Physics has a similar principle. At the quantum level, the observer affects the observed. What is measured changes based on how it's perceived. Now, zoom that idea back to the human experience. When you change how you perceive a moment, you change how your body enters it. When you change how you enter it, the moment responds differently. The shape you take follows the signal you send. This is why two people can walk into the same situation and have completely different outcomes. One collapses, the other stabilizes. Not because one is stronger, but because one is operating from a different internal frequency. And here's the key distinction. Most people don't realize they're broadcasting anything at all. They think life is happening to them, when in reality, their nervous system is setting the tone. Unconscious frequency produces unconscious form. But the moment awareness enters the equation, Shapeshifting becomes deliberate. And this is where control begins. Not control over others, but control over state. Because once you can choose your internal form, you stop being dragged by circumstance. You start shaping your response before the world has a chance to shape you. All right, it's time for your first challenge. For the next 24 hours, notice one old form you keep defaulting to. Maybe it's tension. Maybe it's defensiveness. Maybe it's shrinking. Or maybe it's over-explaining. Then consciously shift your frequency. Change your posture. Slow your breath. Adjust your tone. Choose your words with intention. Don't force it. Signal it. And observe how the world responds when you do not show up the same. Because this is the moment where shapeshifting stops being an idea and starts becoming a practice. You've got this. All right, let's talk about the psychological shifter here in part 3. Here's something most people never realize. The most powerful people in the room aren't always the smartest. They aren't always the loudest, and they're rarely the most rigid. They are, however, the most fluid. They know how to change who they're being without losing who they are. Psychology has a language for this. Archetypes. The warrior, the healer, the creator, or the witness. These aren't costumes. They're modes of consciousness, ways the human mind organizes behavior, emotion, and attention depending on what the moment requires. A leader steps into decisiveness. A parent shifts into protection. An artist becomes receptive. A survivor becomes alert. And the people who appear naturally powerful, they don't stay locked into one mode. They shapeshift psychologically. Most people don't lack ability. They lack identity elasticity. They cling to one single version of themselves because changing feels like lying or weakness or inconsistency. So they say things like, that's not me. Or I'm not wired that way. Or I can't show up like that. But what they're really saying is, I'm afraid I'll lose myself if I change. But here's the truth. You don't lose yourself by shifting roles. You lose yourself by refusing to. Emotional intelligence at its highest level isn't about controlling emotion. It's about choosing the right internal form for the moment. The warrior doesn't show up at a funeral. The healer doesn't negotiate like a pushover. The witness doesn't panic in chaos. Each form has its place. Each one is already in you. The problem isn't that you don't have access. It's that you've been unconsciously loyal to one mask, even when the moment calls for another. Powerful people don't ask, who am I supposed to be? They ask, what does this moment require of me? And then they become that, without apology, without overthinking, and especially without ego. That's psychological shapeshifting. Not pretending, not people-pleasing, not manipulation. It's authorship. It's knowing who you are multidimensional and refusing to shrink yourself down to one identity just to feel safe. Because once you stop protecting a single version of yourself, guess what? You gain access to all of them. Okay, here in part 4, we're going to talk about the spiritual technology of transformation. If parts 2 and 3 explained how shape-shifting works, this part answers a deeper question. Why does it feel so familiar? Because long before psychology named archetypes, long before neuroscience mapped the brain, humans understood themselves as beings of frequency. Not metaphorically, functionally. Ancient systems didn't see consciousness as fixed. They saw it as something you tuned, like an instrument. Different states, different spectrums, different forms of expression. This is the frequency we forgot. Shapeshifting in this sense isn't about becoming something new. It's about tuning back into a range you were designed to operate within. Think about it this way. You're not changing who you are. You're remembering the settings you came with. When your awareness narrows, your form contracts. When your awareness expands, your form evolves. That's why meditation, prayer, ritual, breath work, and stillness have always been tools of transformation. Not because they're mystical practices, but because they shift signal. They alter attention. They regulate nervous system. They change internal rhythm. And once the rhythm changes, the form follows. You don't have to believe in anything to experience this. You felt it. That moment when everything slows, when you feel larger than the problem in front of you, when clarity arrives without effort. That's not coincidence. That's frequency alignment. Spiritual traditions tried to protect this knowledge by encoding it in language, symbols, and stories. But somewhere along the way, we took the poetry literally and lost the practice. We argued about beliefs instead of training awareness. Look, shape-shifting was never meant to be supernatural. It was meant to be intentional. A technology of consciousness. A way of moving through life without being trapped in one emotional register, one identity, or one reaction. And that moment, you realize that you stop asking, who am I supposed to be? And start asking, what frequency does this moment require? Because when you tune correctly, your form follows naturally. No force, no pretending, no effort, just alignment. And here's your second challenge. Close your eyes. Visualize yourself as light. Notice its color, its density, its shape. Now imagine adjusting it. Brighter, steadier, more expansive. Hold that frequency for 1 full minute. Don't visualize success, and don't picture outcomes. Just be the signal. And notice how your body responds when your awareness shifts first. That's shape-shifting, remembered. All right, here in part 5, we're going to talk about the reality recalibration. Here's the part most people aren't prepared for. Once you change internally, the world doesn't immediately respond. Not because the shift didn't work, but because reality needs time to recalibrate. Every time you shapeshift, emotionally, mentally, energetically, you're changing the signal you send into the environment. But the environment has memory. People still see you as you were. Systems still treat you as your old form. And situations still respond based on yesterday's frequency. And this is where most transformations fail. Not because people can't change, but because they abandon the new form too early. They say things like, this isn't working, no one's noticing, nothing's different. But something is different. You are. And when you upgrade your form, reality needs a minute to reboot. Think about it like this. If you change the software, the screen doesn't update instantly. There's a delay, a buffering moment, a recalibration period where the old image flickers before the new one stabilizes. That delay isn't punishment. It's confirmation. It's the universe asking, are you going to stay here, or are you going to retreat to what's familiar? Integrity during this phase is everything. Because the moment you revert, the moment you doubt, the moment you drop back into your old posture, tone, or reaction, you signal. Never mind, keep it the same. But when you hold the new frequency without external validation, that's when reality has no choice but to follow. People respond differently. Opportunities shift. Resistance dissolves. Doors open without explanation. Not because you forced anything, but because you became incompatible with the old pattern. This is the real test of shapeshifting. Can you stay in the new form even when the world hasn't caught up yet? Because those who can don't just change themselves, they change the environment by outlasting it. Here in part 6, we're going to talk about the shapeshifter's responsibility. Here's the truth that doesn't get talked about enough. Adaptability without alignment becomes manipulation. Because once you realize you can change your internal state, regulate your nervous system, alter how you respond to people, you're holding real power. And power always asks a question in return. What are you going to do, and what are you going to use this for? Shape-shifting can be used to influence, to persuade, to command attention, to move people. That's not inherently wrong. But without grounding, it slips into ego, into performance, into control. Real mastery isn't about becoming whoever gets the outcome you want. It's about becoming who the moment needs without betraying your center. This is where ancient wisdom becomes relevant again. There's an ancient idea found across wisdom traditions that personal transformation isn't meant to stop at the self. That when someone learns to regulate their inner world, they carry a responsibility to stabilize the outer one. Not through force, not through domination, but through conscious participation. Shape-shifting, when aligned, becomes a tool for repair. You regulate yourself so others can feel safe. You stabilize your presence so chaos doesn't spread. You elevate your form so truth has room to land. This is how the world heals. Not all at once, but moment by moment, through individuals who choose coherence over reactivity. This is leadership at its highest expression. Not charisma, not authority, but coherence. The danger isn't transformation. The danger is transformation without intention. Because if you can shift forms and don't ask why, you'll start chasing reactions instead of serving purpose. And here's the litmus test. If your shape-shifting leaves people diminished, confused, or dependent, you're out of alignment. If it leaves them clearer, steadier, and more capable, you're doing the work. Mastery doesn't mean changing endlessly. It means choosing your form with integrity. You don't shift to win. You don't shift to dominate. You don't shift to be seen. You shift to serve growth. And that requires restraint as much as skill. Because the highest form of power is knowing you could shapeshift and choosing when it actually matters. All right, here's your next challenge. Ask yourself one question. Who needs to show up in the next form? Not who wants to impress, not who you want to control. Who generally needs a steadier version of you? Shift for them, then stay there. That's responsibility. That's leadership. That's shape-shifting in service of something larger than yourself. All right, we're going to talk about the conscious shapeshifter here in part 7. Up to this point, we've been uncovering something. Not adding anything to you per se, but revealing what's already been operating beneath the surface. You've seen that shape-shifting isn't fantasy. It's biology, it's psychology, it's frequency, and it's responsibility. Now comes the most important distinction of all. There are two kinds of shape-shifting. The first is unconscious. It happens in survival, in people-pleasing, in shrinking to stay safe or hardening to stay in control. You become what the moment pressures you to be. Without realizing, you're changing it all. That kind of shape-shifting keeps you alive, but it doesn't let you lead. The second kind is conscious. This is where authorship begins. Conscious shape-shifting means you don't ask, what's happening to me? You ask, who do I choose to be here? Not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of alignment. This doesn't mean you're constantly changing, though. Real mastery isn't endless transformation. It's intentional selection of form. You stay rooted in who you are, whilst moving fluidly through how you express it. This is where people get it wrong. They think multiple forms mean fragmentation. But the truth is opposite. You are not fragmented. You are multidimensional. The same core awareness expressed through different lenses. Strength when strength is needed. Stillness when clarity is required. Warmth when healing matters, boundaries when truth must be protected. And every situation asks the same quiet question. Who do you choose to be right now? Not someday, not after more work, and not when conditions are perfect. Here, now. And that choice is the moment evolution stops being accidental. You stop being shaped by circumstances and start shaping your response to them. And when response changes, guess what? Reality follows. Not because you're controlling the world, but because you're no longer unconsciously reacting to it. The future doesn't belong to the strongest form. It belongs to the most adaptable consciousness. To those who can shift without losing center, move without abandoning integrity, evolve without erasing themselves. That's the conscious shapeshifter. And once you recognize the ability in yourself, you don't unsee it. Before we close the show, I want to leave you with this message. Shapeshifting isn't mystical. It's human. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about choosing which version of you leads. The one that reacts or the one that responds. The one shaped by habit or the one guided by awareness. This work doesn't require a retreat. It doesn't require new language. It doesn't require anyone else's permission. It happens quietly. In the next conversation, in the next moment of pressure, in the next pause before you speak, move, or decide. That's where shape-shifting lives. Not in fantasy, but in choice. And this is what higher level thinking has always pointed toward. Conscious evolution isn't about escaping humanity. It's about inhabiting it more fully, feeling more, choosing more, becoming more precise with who you are being, moment by moment. You don't wait for the world to change form. You decide when you do. And from that place, everything follows. If you choose to make this a part of your regular and intentional growth and development routine, even baby steps, this will be a life-shifting event. Challenge accepted? Good. I will be here to go on this journey with you, and I invite you to send me a DM through any of my socials to keep me up to speed and connect with me. Ask me questions. Share your wins with me. No matter what, journey on. Thanks so much for listening, daring yourself to do more, and for riding along in my own journey as well. For now, take care, breathe, and go conquer. Join me next Wednesday for another episode of Challenge Accepted with Jonah C. See you next time.